It all started on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that felt almost too peaceful. I was sitting on my front porch with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, enjoying the calm before the chaos of the day began. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Willow Creek looked picture-perfect, rows of neatly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and houses that seemed like they'd been plucked straight out of a magazine. It was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed of living in. At least, that's what I thought when we first moved here. But as I sat there, sipping my coffee and watching the world wake up, something unusual happened. A loud rumbling sound broke the quiet. At first, I thought it might be a delivery truck, or maybe even a neighbor heading off to work. But then I saw it, a white van pulling into my driveway. On the side of the van, bold black letters spelled out Greenscapes Lawn Care. My heart sank. What were they doing here? I hadn't called anyone for lawn care. Before I could even process what was happening, two men hopped out of the van. They were dressed in green uniforms, carrying tools like hedge clippers and shovels. Without so much as a knock on the door or a polite greeting, they walked straight toward my flower beds. My flower beds, the ones I had spent hours planting and nurturing. "Excuse me," I called out, setting my coffee mug down on the porch railing. My voice wavered between confusion and frustration. "What are you doing here?" One of the men stopped briefly, turning to look at me. He held up his clippers like it was some kind of explanation. "We're from the HOA," he said simply, as if that answered everything. "Got a work order for some trimming." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Work order?" I repeated, my voice rising. "From the HOA. For my yard. You don't have permission to be here." He shrugged, clearly unbothered by my reaction. "Orders came from above," he muttered, already turning back to my hydrangeas. Above. Of course. This had Margaret Whittaker's name written all over it. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, or HOA Karen, as some of the neighbors secretly called her behind closed doors. Margaret ruled Willow Creek with an iron fist, enforcing rules that no one really cared about, but everyone feared breaking. I couldn't believe this was happening. These men were cutting into my flowers, the very same ones I had chosen, because they reminded me of my mom's garden back home. Each bloom held meaning. Each plant told a story. And now, these strangers were hacking away at them without a second thought. "Stop right there," I shouted, marching down the porch steps. My bare feet slapped against the cool pavement as I hurried over to them. "You don't have the right to touch anything on my property. Get off my land." They paused for a moment, glancing at each other as if deciding whether to listen. Finally, one of them sighed and lowered his tools. "Look, lady," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We're just doing our job. Take it up with the HOA if you've got a problem." And with that, they packed up their things and left, leaving behind a mess of half-cut branches and scattered petals. Standing there, staring at the damage, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling inside me. How dare they? Who did they think they were, barging onto my property like they owned the place? As I picked up the remnants of my once beautiful garden, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to end here. If Margaret thought she could send workers to my house without asking, she had another thing coming. I didn't move to Willow Creek to be pushed around, and I wasn't about to start now. After the workers left, I stood in my driveway, staring at the destruction they'd caused. My once vibrant flower beds now looked like a battlefield. Snit stems, scattered leaves, and mangled blooms everywhere. It felt personal, like someone had deliberately tried to erase a piece of me. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. It was about respect, about boundaries, and I wasn't going to let anyone trample over mine. I went inside, grabbed my laptop, and sat at the kitchen table. If Margaret Whittaker thought she could send people to my house without permission, she needed to be reminded of the rules, or at least what I assumed were the rules. The HOA handbook had been shoved into a drawer months ago, untouched since we moved in. Now I pulled it out, flipping through its glossy pages with growing frustration. There had to be something in there that protected homeowners from this kind of invasion. Finally, I found it. A section labeled Maintenance Policies. According to the guidelines, the HOA could perform necessary maintenance on properties if homeowners failed to comply with aesthetic standards. Necessary maintenance. That phrase made my stomach churn. Who decided what was necessary? And how did cutting down perfectly healthy plants fit into that definition? But then I noticed something else buried deeper in the fine print. Homeowners will be notified via certified mail prior to scheduled work. Certified mail. Not an email, not a sticky note on the door, not even a phone call. Certified mail meant documentation, proof that the homeowner had been informed. I racked my brain, trying to remember if I'd received anything official recently. Nothing came to mind. No envelope marked certified mail, no signature required. Absolutely nothing. This wasn't just carelessness, it was deliberate. Margaret had sent those workers knowing full well I hadn't been notified. She wanted to send a message, to assert her authority by showing everyone in Willow Creek who was really in charge. Well, she picked the wrong person to mess with. Feeling a surge of determination, I started gathering evidence. First, I took photos of the damaged flower beds, making sure to capture every detail: the hacked branches, the torn roots, the empty spaces where my hydrangeas used to bloom. Then, I snapped pictures of the Greenscapes van as it drove away, including a clear shot of the license plate. Every picture was another piece of ammunition, another way to prove that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was trespassing. Plain and simple. Next, I turned my attention back to the HOA guidelines. I highlighted key sections, jotting down notes in the margins. The more I read, the angrier I got. The rules weren't designed to protect homeowners. They were designed to control them. From paint colors to mailbox styles, the HOA dictated every aspect of life in Willow Creek. And now, apparently, they thought they could dictate what happened in my own backyard. By the time I finished, my dining table was covered in papers, sticky notes, and coffee stains. But I felt ready. Armed with facts and evidence, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I couldn't let this slide. Not for me. And not for anyone else in Willow Creek who might find themselves in the same situation someday. As I closed the handbook, I glanced out the window at the remnants of my garden. A small part of me wanted to cry, but a bigger part refused to give in. Margaret Whittaker had underestimated me. She thought I'd roll over and accept her version of community standards, but she was wrong. Very wrong. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Sleep had been hard to come by. I kept replaying the scene in my head. The workers barging onto my property, the sound of clippers slicing through my hydrangeas, Margaret's smug face lurking behind it all. But lying awake in the dark gave me time to think. And now, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, I was ready to take action. Margaret lived just across the street, in a house that screamed HOA president. It was immaculate, symmetrical bushes lining the driveway, a spotless cobblestone path leading to the front door, and flower beds so perfect they looked fake. Even her mailbox gleamed like it had never seen a speck of dust. As I crossed the road, clutching my folder of evidence, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction, knowing I was about to disrupt her carefully curated world. Before I could even knock, the door swung open. Margaret stood there, arms crossed, wearing a pastel cardigan and an expression so calm it bordered on condescending. She must have seen me coming, probably from behind her lace curtains, where she liked to spy on everyone. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly, though her tone dripped with insincerity. Her lips curled into a tight smile, like she already knew why I was here and was daring me to say it. "You can start by explaining why unauthorized workers showed up at my house yesterday." I shot back, not wasting a second. I held up the photos I'd taken, shoving them toward her. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when they destroyed my garden? Margaret barely glanced at the pictures. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, feigning concern. Oh dear, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Those gentlemen were simply ensuring compliance with community standards. Compliance? I echoed, incredulous. My voice grew louder despite my best efforts to stay calm. You mean cutting down my plants because you didn't approve of how I landscaped them? That's not compliance. That's trespassing. For a moment, Margaret's polished facade cracked. Her eyebrows twitched upward, betraying a flicker of irritation. But she quickly recovered, smoothing her features back into that practiced mask of superiority. Rules exist for a reason, she said coolly. Uniformity is essential to maintaining property values. Surely you understand the importance of keeping our neighborhood looking its best. Uniformity, I repeated, stepping closer. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to breathe steadily. Are you serious right now? You sent strangers onto my private property without permission. You didn't notify me. You didn't ask. You just assumed you could do whatever you wanted. That's not uniformity. That's bullying. Margaret's smile faltered again, this time replaced by a cold glare. I assure you, everything was done according to HOA guidelines, she said firmly. If you have concerns, feel free to bring them up at the next meeting. The next meeting. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. No, Margaret. This isn't something we're brushing under the rug until next month. This happened yesterday on my property. And unless you want me to involve higher authorities. And trust me, I will. You'll fix this. Immediately. Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flash across her face. She wasn't used to being challenged. In Willow Creek, most people either followed her rules or stayed silent. But I wasn't most people. And as I stood there, refusing to back down, I realized something important. Margaret thrived on fear, but fear only works when no one stands up to it. When she finally spoke again, her voice lacked its usual confidence. I'll look into it, she said stiffly, avoiding eye contact. In the meantime, perhaps you should review the HOA guidelines more thoroughly. Oh, don't worry, I replied, tucking the photos back into my folder. I've already read them cover to cover. And guess what? You broke your own rules. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Margaret standing in her doorway. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I felt like I was gaining ground. The battle wasn't over yet, but round one. That was mine. After my confrontation with Margaret, I knew I couldn't stop there. She might have acted like she was untouchable, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. If she thought sending workers to my house without permission was acceptable, then it was time to show her, and everyone else in Willow Creek, that this kind of behavior wasn't going unnoticed. I started by knocking on doors. At first, I was nervous. What if people didn't want to talk? What if they were too afraid of crossing Margaret to say anything? But as soon as I explained what had happened, how the HOA had sent workers to my property uninvited, the floodgates opened. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been treated unfairly. Mr. Peddle from 2 streets over invited me inside when I told him why I was there. His living room smelled faintly of spices, and a teapot sat steaming on the coffee table. Oh yes, he said, shaking his head as he listened to my story. They did something similar to us last year. While we were on vacation, they repainted our mailbox. Said it didn't match. We weren't even consulted. Repainted your mailbox. I echoed, stunned. That's ridiculous. Did they at least tell you beforehand? He chuckled dryly. Tell us. No. We came home and found it done. When we asked about it, they said it was for the good of the neighborhood. Can you believe that? As I continued visiting neighbors, more stories poured out. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, shared how she'd been fined for leaving a small garden gnome on her porch. It's not like it was offensive or anything, she said, rolling her eyes. Just a little decoration. But apparently, it violated some invisible rule. Then there was the Rodriguez family, who had moved away months earlier. Their old neighbor filled me in. They got fined repeatedly for having a vegetable garden in their backyard. Eventually, they ripped it all out because they couldn't afford the penalties anymore. Such a shame. They were growing tomatoes and peppers for everyone on the block. Each story fueled my determination. This wasn't just about me or my flower beds. It was about a pattern of control disguised as community care. Margaret wasn't enforcing rules to make Willow Creek better. She was using them to keep everyone in line, to remind us constantly that she held the power. Armed with these accounts, I decided to draft a petition. It wasn't complicated. A simple document asking for accountability from the HOA board, demanding transparency and fair treatment for all homeowners. I printed copies and handed them out during evening walks, explaining to anyone who would listen what was happening behind closed doors. To my surprise, people eagerly signed their names. Some even thanked me for speaking up. Within a week, nearly 70 signatures adorned the petition. 70 voices united against years of frustration. Holding those pages in my hands felt empowering, like I'd finally found allies in this fight. Margaret might have ruled Willow Creek with an iron fist, but she hadn't counted on one thing: people are stronger together. When I delivered the petition to the next HOA meeting, Margaret looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Her usual air of authority faltered as I laid the stack of papers on the table in front of her. "This is just the beginning," I said firmly, meeting her gaze. "You can either listen now, or you can deal with the consequences later." For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. And I knew I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air. The community center, a plain, beige building with buzzing fluorescent lights, was packed to the brim. Normally, these meetings were sparsely attended, mostly by the same handful of overly eager homeowners who seemed to live for rule enforcement. But tonight was different. Dozens of residents filled the rows of folding chairs, their murmurs creating a low hum that buzzed like static electricity. People weren't just here to listen. They were here to speak up. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her usual polished demeanor tinged with unease. She adjusted her glasses repeatedly, straightened her papers more times than necessary, and avoided making eye contact with anyone. For once, she didn't look untouchable. In fact, she looked nervous, like someone backed into a corner with no clear way out. When it was my turn to address the group, I stepped forward, clutching the petition tightly in one hand. My heart pounded as all eyes turned toward me, but I forced myself to breathe deeply. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone in this room who had silently endured Margaret's overreach for far too long. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves twisting in my stomach. Many of us have experienced frustration with the HOA. Unauthorized actions on private property, excessive fines, and a lack of transparency. Tonight, we're asking for change. I held up the petition, letting everyone see the sheer number of signatures covering its pages. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people craned their necks to get a better look. Even Margaret leaned forward slightly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "These aren't isolated incidents," I continued, scanning the room. "They're part of a pattern of control disguised as compliance. Last week, workers showed up at my house uninvited and destroyed my flower beds, all because the HOA decided they didn't meet some arbitrary standard. No notice, no warning, just strangers cutting down plants I'd worked hard to grow." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Then I turned to Margaret. "And when I confronted you about it, your response was dismissive. You told me this was about uniformity. But let's be honest, that's not what this is about. This is about power. About making sure no one questions your authority." The room erupted into murmurs. Someone shouted, "She's right." Another voice chimed in, "We've all been treated this way." Margaret tried to regain control, standing abruptly and raising her hands for silence. "These allegations are baseless," she insisted, her voice sharp but lacking its usual confidence. "The HOA operates within legal boundaries to preserve our community's integrity." Integrity? Mrs. Thompson called out from the back row, her tone dripping with sarcasm or intimidation. The comment drew laughter and applause, breaking whatever fragile hold Margaret still had over the room. Neighbors started sharing their own stories about fines for minor infractions, unauthorized work orders, and rules that seemed designed to punish rather than protect. Each story added fuel to the fire, turning the meeting into something more than a discussion. It became a reckoning. By the end of the night, Margaret's carefully constructed image had crumbled. Her authority, once absolute, now felt shaky at best. As the meeting wrapped up, several board members exchanged uneasy glances. One even muttered an apology under his breath before slipping out early. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I felt hope, not just for myself, but for the entire community. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but this was a start. And as I left the community center that night, I realized something important. When people come together, even the strongest walls can crack. The fallout from the meeting was swift and undeniable. Margaret Whittaker, who had always seemed untouchable, suddenly looked like a house of cards collapsing under its own weight. Within days, whispers spread through Willow Creek that she had submitted her resignation as HOA president, citing health reasons. No one bought it, of course. Everyone knew the truth. She couldn't handle the pressure anymore. Her reign of control had been exposed, and she didn't have the strength or the support to keep fighting. But Margaret wasn't the only one stepping down. Several other board members followed suit, resigning quietly without much explanation. Rumor had it they were afraid of facing further scrutiny or even legal action. Whatever the reason, their departure cleared the way for fresh leadership. People who actually cared about fairness and collaboration rather than domination. In their place, a new board emerged, made up of neighbors I recognized and trusted. There was Mr. Patel, whose calm demeanor made him a natural mediator, Mrs. Thompson, who brought wisdom and humor to every conversation, and even young Sarah Jenkins, a stay-at-home mom with a passion for community building. Together, they drafted policies that prioritized transparency and respect for homeowners' rights. One of the first changes, a rule requiring written approval from homeowners before any external work could be performed on their property. No more surprise visits from landscapers or painters showing up uninvited. They also implemented a cap on fines, ensuring penalties wouldn't spiral out of control for minor infractions. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like a neighborhood where people mattered more than rules. As for me, I became something of a local hero, a role I never imagined playing when we first moved here. Neighbors often stopped by to thank me for standing up to Margaret, sharing stories of their own struggles and how inspired they were by my determination. It felt strange but gratifying to know I'd made a difference, not just for myself, but for others too. Lily noticed the change too. One afternoon, as we sat together on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Mom, everyone's being nicer lately." She didn't understand all the details, but she could feel the shift in the air. The tension that used to hang over Willow Creek like a storm cloud had lifted, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. Still, I knew this victory came with responsibility. Change doesn't stick unless people are willing to maintain it, so I stayed involved. I attended board meetings regularly, offering input and keeping an eye on things to ensure no one tried slipping back into old habits. Other residents did the same, proving that the spirit of unity sparked by the petition hadn't faded. Slowly but surely, Willow Creek began to transform, not just in policy, but in attitude. People smiled more, waved hello, and took pride in their homes, not because they feared punishment, but because they genuinely wanted to contribute to the community. Even the gardens seemed brighter, bursting with colors that reflected individuality instead of forced uniformity. Looking back, I realized this fight had taught me something valuable. Standing your ground isn't easy, but it's always worth it. Margaret may have thought she could intimidate me into submission, but she underestimated one thing: the power of resilience. And now, thanks to the courage of so many neighbors willing to stand together, Willow Creek finally felt like home. Months passed, and Willow Creek continued to evolve in ways I never thought possible. The new HOA board worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by years of heavy-handed rule enforcement. They organized community events, barbecues, movie nights, and even a weekend farmers market that brought neighbors together in ways we hadn't experienced before. Slowly but surely, the icy walls of fear and intimidation melted away, replaced by warmth and connection. But for me, the most rewarding part of this journey was reclaiming my garden. After the workers had butchered it months earlier, I'd been too angry, and honestly, too heartbroken, to fix it right away. Those flower beds weren't just plants. They were memories. Each bloom reminded me of moments from my childhood, spent helping my mom tend to her own garden. Rebuilding it felt like healing not just my yard, but a piece of myself. One sunny Saturday morning, I decided it was time. Armed with fresh soil, packets of seeds, and colorful perennials from the local nursery, I got to work. Lily joined in, barefoot and giggling as she dug holes in the dirt with her tiny plastic shovel. Together, we planted hydrangeas, the same kind I'd lost, and added lavender, daisies, and marigolds for pops of color. By the end of the day, sweat dripped down my back, and streaks of mud covered our hands and knees, but the sight of those newly planted flowers made everything worth it. As weeks went by, the garden began to thrive again. The hydrangeas unfurled their lush blooms, the lavender filled the air with its soothing scent, and the daisies swayed gently in the breeze like cheerful dancers. Every morning, I'd step outside with my coffee and marvel at how far we'd come. Not just the garden, but all of us. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. It still had its quirks, its rules, and yes, the occasional disagreement, but it finally felt alive. Vibrant. Real. Lily loved the transformation too. She'd run through the grass barefoot, weaving crowns out of petals, and pretending she was a queen ruling over her kingdom. Watching her play, I realized something important. This fight hadn't been about protecting property lines or winning arguments. It had been about teaching her that standing up for yourself doesn't mean starting wars. It means refusing to let others take what's rightfully yours. It means finding strength in your voice and courage in your convictions. Other neighbors seemed inspired to reclaim their spaces as well. Mr. Patil installed a small fountain in his front yard, its gentle trickle adding music to the street. Mrs. Thompson hung wind chimes on her porch, their soft clinking filling the evenings with calm. Even Sarah Jenkins painted her front door, a bright shade of turquoise, a bold choice that would have earned her a fine under Margaret's regime, but now sparked smiles from passersby. Willow Creek still had its share of challenges, of course. Not everyone agreed on every decision, and there were moments when old frustrations flared up. But the difference was this. Instead of silence and resentment, people talked. They shared their concerns, listened to each other, and found solutions together. That spirit of collaboration made all the difference. As I stood one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon and cast golden light over our little corner of the world, I felt a deep sense of peace. This place wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a community. And while I knew life here wouldn't always be smooth sailing, I also knew we were stronger than any storm. Margaret Whittaker may have tried to break us, but in doing so, she unintentionally united us. Her actions taught us that fear only works when no one fights back, and that sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting your home. It's about creating a space where you can truly belong. And for the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I belonged.